Welcome back to Documentary First, an inside look at a documentary filmmaker's journey. I'm your host, Jason Rugg, joined as always by our documentary filmmaker, Christian Taylor.
Hey, Jason.
Hey, Christian. Good to see you.
You too.
And do you want to give a quick little intro to our guest today?
So I want to welcome Nicolás Repetto here. He is the composer for a recent film on PBS called A Run for More. However, he has plenty other credits to his name, and we will let him share those in just a minute. But Jason, why don't you do his bio real quick?
Yeah, so Nicolás Repetto worked on the original score for the feature documentary A Run for More, and the score is available anywhere you listen to music, so you can go look it up if you want to hear Nicolás's work here. The film is directed by Pulitzer Prize-winning Ray Whitehouse and follows the story of Frankie Gonzales-Wolfe, a transgender woman running for city council in San Antonio, Texas. And we were talking before the show, you also write concert music, right?
I do. Thank you for having me, by the way. I want to say.
Oh, yes. Thank you so much for coming.
Glad to have you here.
I do write concert music, and I kind of straddle a little bit of everything. So concert music, I have a piece I'm working on now that's going to be premiered November by the Sequoia Symphony, and it's part of the California Reflections program. And it's happening. It's a statewide kind of concert music festival from all the way from Sacramento all the way to San Diego, so the whole state. And I also have a fantasy film coming out sometime in the fall to the spring. I can't say when because they told me to keep it top secret, but I'll kind of give that general area. And it's called Empire Queen, and it's kind of like a cool mix of, I don't know if you've ever seen Harry Potter and The Princess Bride.
Yeah, sure.
Comedic homage to that. I'm really happy. I finished that film like 3 years ago, so now it's going to be out there soon. So I just want to put that out.
That's super exciting.
Along with The American Question, it's another documentary I worked on that hopefully will be out soon as well. So,
Wow.
Yeah. And other than that, the concert music is taking up a lot of my time now, and just hunkering away and doing that. So, but it's great being here to discuss.
Well, it sounds like you have been very, very busy. Congratulations to you. That's a lot of excellent work. We want to get to know you a little bit and learn more about, what it's like to work with a composer, and give you some insights of how maybe directors can work with composers better. First of all, why don't you just start by telling us where you're from, a little bit about how you fell in love with music, and then how you ended up composing in LA.
Yeah, so I was born in Argentina, actually, in Buenos Aires, to be precise. And my parents moved us to actually the States around when I was 5, and this is like around 85, and to Florida. We moved to Miami and grew up in that neighborhood. They put me in an ESOL program, which it eliminated my accent at a very young age. As you know, during the time of Ronald Reagan, which is another story. But he had a thing where he allowed immigrants to come in, so we moved and got an education in Florida. Went to the University of Miami. I picked up my violin when I was in middle school. Started kind of dabbling in music then. My dad would drive me also to the conservatory to take lessons. And then I kind of interested in composition around high school because I would listen to film scores, and I also had a string quartet I played in. So then I started kind of writing music kind of in that style, but also, as well as learning about Mozart, Beethoven, and all the classical masters. And from that point, I decided, well, this is fun. Let me go into college and kind of see what I can do. So then I went into for violin performance, but then I decided I actually like telling musicians what to do in terms of writing things out, because we were playing Mahler, I remember, in college, and since I was in the violin section, I saw all the little instructions he gave all the musicians, like I want it this way, and then play it this way, and I was like fascinated with that. So I was like, let me try that, and I majored in not only music education, violin performance, but I also took composition lessons in college, and kind of took that and then went into jingle writing for commercials. That's how I got my first gig writing music that actually paid me. So
Right.
this was when I was teaching at the time. Actually, I was teaching middle school as a music teacher, and I would teach orchestra and stuff like that in Florida. And I remember I was wanted to get into this business of writing music for commercial for film and TV and stuff like that. And I had a student whose mom worked at a TV station, and she's like, I asked her, "Hey, do you know anybody that might need music for something?" I wanted to get into that field, and she's like, "Yeah, try so and so from this ad agency that I know." I'm like, "Okay, great." So I met up with this person. He was the ad director of BSG Advertising, and we had lunch, and we basically hit it off. And he asked me, "Hey, I have 10 commercials I need a composer for, so let me know if you're interested." And I said, "Sure." And this is when I first got my computer to do all this media stuff, because in my early days, I thought, oh, you just sit by candlelight and write your music, like kind of like Beethoven did. Totally wrong. I was like, I didn't go to school for this stuff, like in terms of like the technology needed. So I figured it out, and I wrote, I think that it was 10 jingles, and he approved 8 of them, which is not bad. And I kind of made what I used to make as a teacher. I made that in like 2 days, the amount of money,
Wow.
like,
Wow.
that would take me like a month to make as a teacher. So I was like, okay, this is cool. And that kind of jump started the thing. And from that point, I'm like, well, I need to move to LA. I was looking up all these websites and kind of making a plan. In about a year, 2 years, I should like make the plan to save up money, and then sell everything and drive to LA. And that's what I did in 2012. I basically drove to LA, and luckily I'm still here.
And it looks like you've got quite a bit of work under your belt. Tell us how all that happened and kind of some projects that you're most proud of.
Yeah, I mean, in the early days when I moved, I did a lot of freebies for filmmakers, just to like get my feet wet and just work on the craft of writing for music. And that was, I think I did a feature film for, I don't know, a few. I think it was like credit and maybe a meal or something back in the day. But as time went on, I worked on things like the most recent thing I worked on. Obviously, The Run for More is one of the films I'm really proud of. Also, A Sound of Identity, another documentary I worked on about a transgender opera singer. And by that time, we had the budget to record with a full orchestra. I recorded here in town, LA, at United Studios, where a lot of classic Sinatra stuff was recorded back in the day. And the director, James Kicklighter, was so happy that he actually cried at the sessions, because that was his first time. We worked already on, by that time, on a few films already, and I think it was like 6 movies we worked on already. And that was the time where he was like, "Oh wow, this is great. We finally have the budget for an orchestra." And the producers were all happy, and it happened actually on my 40th birthday, the recording session. So that was a fun
Great
little
birthday present.
Oh, it was fantastic.
Yeah.
My husband brought in a cake shaped like a violin, and everyone like sang.
Oh wow.
That's beautiful.
But it was fun. It was a memorable day for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, my composer's name is Jeff Kurtenecker. He is an incredible guy, phenomenal composer, and he did the soundtrack for Wildstar, which is a video game, and they ended up recording live with an orchestra. And I remember him saying the same thing. That was the first time he had been in there, and it was just like this amazing experience,
Yeah. I mean,
I wanted him to record our score with an orchestra, but hello, that is very expensive.
It is. And sometimes it's, as a composer, you're actually using other people's money, right, to record this stuff. And when that happens, you have to have the producers, like, you have to make sure your case is stated why we need it. Well, it's like, in a movie also, you wouldn't use like robots to play actors, right? So it brings this humanity that you can't have without. I mean, even though like the sample libraries we use, the technology we use are realistic enough, but there's something about going to the studio and having the musicians kind of bring it to life off the page and stuff like that. So that's usually the argument I use when I'm kind of vying for a budget. But also the director I work with, that's the important thing. The director has to have kind of a passion for that, and to make sure that that tradition of using orchestra or just live musicians is not lost, because it brings a little something else to the score. That's
for
usually
sure.
not found. Yeah.
And I know there's a hybrid too, because Jeff and I talked about you can record some instruments live and blend them into the electronic score when you can't afford an orchestra, and we did do that in a few different times. So yeah, there are ways to bring live elements in there.
For sure. In this film, the recent film I did, Run for More, I since I'm a violinist, I recorded some stuff here in my studio back here, and it's like you're saying, in that fashion where you record and then you manipulate the sound a certain way. I remember there was a scene in the film that was talking about a traumatic event that Frankie went through, and I took violin and viola recordings and basically detuned them and kind of reversed the sound a little bit, and it created this really weird, eerie texture that the director loved as well. So in those cases when the budget is limited, you have to be kind of get creative in terms of what you can do. I mean, I've even recorded stuff. I've gone to junkyards and recorded different sounds using a giant cello bow I use to and just bow everything and see what can come out of it.
Wow.
When I was teaching, I also recorded some of my students like saying creepy things, and I've used that for scary films I've scored. There's a film called Spider. It's on Tubi right now, and I used old recordings of like the kids were having fun playing just random things on the instrument. Like, hey, can I just record you guys doing this? And they're like, oh, sure, let's do it. And then they have fun. And I kept those recordings. It's like one of those things that you never know when you can use that. And I've recorded also in parking structures to get like the ambience there. So I try to find ways to keep it interesting,
Yeah, that's awesome.
That's fascinating.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about how A Run for More came to you and about your process for that?
So I met, I was brought into the project by Katrina De Vera, the editor. I met her, I think 3 years prior we were at Sundance I had a project there. Well, actually I had a project at Slam Dance, the opposite film festival of Sundance. And she was there for something else, and we hit it off, had a few drinks. And then I also met another editor named, her name is, oh my gosh, she's Portuguese and she's from Texas as well. Friend of Katrina's. And it'll come to me. I just lost it. But she's the one that recommended Ray to me in terms of like, hey, because she's being a consultant on the film, and in terms of because she's a very good editor, so she was being a consultant, but Katrina was going to be the full-time editor. So they brought me in, and I talked to Ray, and it was his first feature film, by the way. He's never worked with a composer before. So he told me right off the bat, basically, Nick, I'm going to rely on you for expertise, since you're the expert in this in terms of composition. So I was like, sure, I will help out as much as you can, as much as you need in terms of like the composition process. So he and I got together, did our spotting session, and I asked them.
What's the spotting session?
Spotting session is when we sit down and watch the film together, basically, and we decide where music is going to start and what style it's going to be on and then what the music should do in terms of emotional value, what it can add to the film. And I remember, I think Ray said, Frankie's story is about perseverance and kind of hope and struggle. And I took those ideas and I told them, well, we should really have two themes then, hope and struggle, to kind of match the energy that she is showing in the film. And I told them, okay, let me go away into my studio and come up with like a theme suite. So I came back and I think I wrote about this is early on, I think, after watching a very rough cut of the film, right? It wasn't even completely finished. And I wrote about 10 minutes of music, and from there were the kernels for the score. Basically, it's like I had the main ideas I wanted to hit on and basically expand. So the process came from that theme suite that I wrote, and I think I wrote something. Hopeful was, I think it used piano and cello and some synth sounds that I created. And for the struggle one, it had that kind of like violin thing I mentioned earlier in there. So I early on I did that experimentation, and he seemed to like it. So then we went forward and then started plugging it in. And I worked closely with the editor as well, Katrina, because I think even before we had a final cut, it was like always in flux just to get the picture as close to. I guess it was being tightened so much, from all the feedback from everybody, and which only helped the picture. So then the music had to kind of be adjusted as well. So in that regard, I was able to, I think, get a final product that we're all proud of. It just it took some time because the picture was always being changed, and that's something that composers complain a lot about. But it's just part
typical.
of the process.
I brought my composer in for The Girl Who Wore Freedom very early on and had him composing, lots of little stuff for us. We didn't want to fall in love with temp stuff. And so we did ask him to write stuff that we could edit to. And he seemed to like that process. I felt bad for him, but it was really a collaborative effort. And there's a great joy, I think, in that kind of teamwork with a composer.
Oh, you're one of the few that love that temp is like kind of the bane for some composers.
Yeah.
In a way, it's if the director doesn't know what he or she wants, I mean, it helps, right? Because you kind of pick apart the temp. Like, what do you like about this? Like, do you like the speed, the tempo, the style, the feel? So in a way, I'm kind of not ambivalent, but I use it as a tool to help me kind of get into the director's mind. So, but then I have other directors who are like, don't use temp at all, and then we just talk it through, and then I get a visceral response, and then I write from that. And I know that James and I worked that way before on all the films we worked on. Like The Sound of Identity was, no temp, and it's for that. I remember I heard a solo violin in the distance. There was this beautiful shot of Lucia, the subject, and that's what kind of drove that. So in a way, when I write, it's kind of in reaction to what I'm seeing. So if the film is finished to an extent, I can kind of get a good response to that. But then other times, writing ahead of time, kind of like what you did with your composer, that's also a great way to do it. And I like to have little tools that I use, and those are the two ways I kind of approach it. So
I feel like we're talking a little bit of inside baseball, so I want to define a couple of terms. Sure. So truthfully, when we're talking about temp, we're banding it around as if it's a thing. What we're talking about is when an editor is trying to put together a story, particularly in the documentary sense, you really do need something to edit to, because the music is such an integral part of the emotion and of telling the story. And I think most editors do work well when they're having some sort of emotion undergirding what they're editing. And so typically in an edit session, an editor and a director may take a piece of music that they envision hearing behind a thing, and they will use that music while they edit, in hopes that, in the end, a composer writing the original score will be able to replicate the feeling of whatever that temp music is. But directors also then fall in love with the temp music. And it's very difficult sometimes for composers to satisfy that because they are so accustomed. It really is like muscle memory. You're so accustomed to watching your piece set to that music. It's very hard to get off of that horse and ride a different one.
Yeah. And there's I guess a trend, I want to say, that a lot of composers who do that, especially in the bigger budget films, they everything starts sounding the same after a while because they either the director or the studio says, I need it, we like what the temp is here, what the temp is doing here, can you do that? So then like a composer ends up aping like the thing, and like it starts sounding kind of redundant. But there are ways to kind of avoid that. I remember when I was studying this stuff early on, there were composers like, I think, Jerry Goldsmith, who put his foot down, and when he wrote, like, I remember for music for Planet of the Apes, that is written in a style that is considered a little bit anachronistic. It's like archaic. It's not done anymore, but he thought it worked, and I think the director kind of warmed up to it, but then the composer also has to have a kind of a distinct voice to do that, strong personality, to kind of fight for that, and the director too. The director has to vie for it too and kind of go along with it. It's just a little difficult when studios or producers are like, well, we like this because it's worked, and let's keep it safe. But then it's like a balance of like, you want to create art, but then I don't know, you have to make sure that the studio is comfortable, and then it's going to make the money. That's the other thing. So, but that's the cool thing about the documentaries, is that you can experiment a little more. You have a little more independence, bring something that unique to the story, and I find that rewarding, because you get to experiment and collaborate, and that's if the director jives with you, and then they give you the freedom to do that. Sometimes not so much, but in my experience, it's been the opposite. I've stated my case. I would like to try this, and they're like, sure, let's see. It'll just make the film and the whole experience better, I think, if you have that freedom.
I was going to say there's a very interesting YouTube video kind of talking about temp score and all this sort of stuff. It's called Hollywood Scores and Soundtracks, What Do They Sound Like by Every Frame of Painting. And it shows movies side by side and bounces back and forth between the temp score and, it's like the same song in two movies with slightly different instrumentation. And you can tell, which one came first and which one was kind of like, yeah, we cut to this and we need it to just sound like that. And you're pretty much just going to be stuck with it.
Yeah.
And it's a really good case for why not to do it, I think, because it's just like you said, it's not original. It's safe, but do you necessarily want to be safe, or do you want something innovative that really catches your ear or catches your eye? And I'll make sure we have that in the description. But it's a really good listen, particularly if you like scores. You can just see how it changes kind of the edit, kind of the film, kind of the texture of everything. So
thanks, Jason.
Yeah.
Well, so you were talking about working with a director. That's one thing I want to ask you. You've worked with, it sounds like, several directors now. Talk about the composer-director relationship. And in particular, what advice would you give to directors in working with composers?
Yeah, so my relationships are, it's I kind of, I would say, if I were to give a analogy, it's kind of like dating. You have to kind of get to know each other at first. And I have tremendous respect for directors because they have to handle everything, like all the departments, which is, they're always stressed. That's the thing. And Christian's like, yeah, she's like, yep, that's true. It's one of those things that, you want to make their life easier as much as possible. And that's where I come in when it comes to the, because I think in film school, most directors don't have. There's maybe a paragraph on score and writing original music for your film. It's that's what I've heard from other directors, like friends and stuff in the field that have gone to film school. And so I come in and I want to make their life easier, so I try to become their friend, get to know them. Like I want to know how they think about life and how that translates later to their art and their filmmaking. So a lot of what I do is psychological. I have to get inside their head, what's working in terms of like what I'm writing for the film. Sometimes, I remember I worked with a director who's like, was very upfront. I don't want anything that sounds organic or real. I want all synth instruments. I'm like, that's fine with me. I get to work on, creating some really cool synth sounding scores, and that, for me, it's also a learning experience because I have to kind of adapt to their tastes and their styles. So, and so it's kind of like the music part is the stuff that we're trained on. That's so, but we have to translate the words that the directors give us and create music out of that, and that is, I think, more psychological than just creating the music. So you have to, in a way, you have to be a psychologist. And
yeah, it's so fascinating that you bring that up, because that was exactly my experience. I mean, I've shared that before on this podcast, because when Jeff and I met, we decided to work together basically because I really liked him. I liked him. He was funny. I enjoyed being around him. And I didn't realize how much that kind of chemistry was important when you're working with a composer, but it's super important. And I didn't really understand until I made a ton of mistakes and he almost quit. Well, he did quit, but I wouldn't let him leave.
Oh, no.
I didn't understand that composers are emotional creatures,
Right.
and that they are really emotional, and that they want to please, and that they are trying to discern what you're telling them and putting it into something, that you can hear. And finally, he said to me, just tell me what emotion you want in this piece, and that was like, that broke the language barrier. I then began to understand how to talk to him, and he was trying to understand me and figure out what I wanted. And I think that you're right. The key for a composer and a director working well together is that close relationship, understanding each other's language, and figuring out together, what you want something to sound like.
Very true.
And feel like.
Exactly. It's an emotional. Rather than use, rather than trying to have the director learn musical terms, which they will not, and I wouldn't want them to. It's, I want, just speak to me like you would an actor. Like, like I want this performance to be this, either using emotional words or just emotions in general, to capture that helps a lot. It's just, and then we have our own, we dip into these like buckets of tools that we have from our training that, and then we can try things, that's how it works.
And I remember him saying too, what do you want the audience to feel at this point? Because ultimately that's what matters. You're using music as a tool to draw out an emotional response in the audience. And I think you guys, I had no idea how important that psychology piece that you're talking about was, but it's critical. Did you guys have to take psychology courses?
I mean, I think in some film scoring programs there might be a section on that. I just, in my own personal interest, I love psychology classes. I've taken that, and something about getting into like a director's mind and the psyche of that, the experience of trying to understand a point of view, because in a way it's like I'm an archaeologist uncovering hieroglyphics. It's like, how do I discern this? It's like, or just figure it out. It's one of those things that it's a great mystery, and it's amazing how the greatest scores have come out of just trying to figure out what a director wants. It's one of those things that is still baffling, and it it's something that could write a paper on, actually.
Yeah. Changing subjects a little bit,
Sure.
and this may be unfair to ask you, so please tell me if it's a stupid question, but I really am curious if you can tell me why music creates an emotional response in humans.
No, not a stupid question at all. It's like I think it goes back to the days of when we were in caves and just you heard something and it's either nothing to worry about or danger. Um, so it elicits a fight or flight response, I think, and it comes from that. Um, and the psychology of that comes into play in scores because I think you mentioned earlier it's we're in the business of manipulating emotions, and knowing that, I think that piece of psychology, we can kind of imbue that into the score to affect what we want. So I think it comes from just innate primordial DNA that's embedded in all of us. I mean, when we're in for instance, I recently saw Oppenheimer on IMAX. Talk about a
Yeah, me
visceral
too.
experience.
Ooh,
I
yeah.
mean,
So good.
it's sometimes I wonder, like, is Christopher Nolan like going deaf or something? I mean, no, his use of sound is just that. I mean, he wants you to feel like this explosion, and then just he cranks up the mix up to like the wazoo, and like I felt it in my bones, like the response. So it's that. I mean, imagine like being chased by a bear or something. It's like that, those chills. I got those kind of chills watching the sound explosion. So to me, it's firmly planted in our DNA to feel this way and have that kind of
Yeah, I
response.
mean, it has to be, but to me, it really is remarkable that I can hear, a violin play a certain thing and it bring me to tears, you know, or I hear, plucking on a cello or whatever, and I get really scared. It's just crazy how music can control our emotions. I just don't get it. And I think a good director and a good composer together can figure out, that magic.
I think, like, when you say a good director, I think a director who's attuned to that and knows the power of music, just either by studying or just research or whatever, knowing coming in knowing the strengths of what music can do kind of empowers their composer in a way, like, okay, I know what he wants, or I know what she wants. It's like, it's one of these things that will in the end help the composer write his or her best music in terms of
Yeah.
that style. So yeah, like, having that knowledge is very useful, and sometimes you don't get that a lot in first time directors, because it's a lot of trial and error, but it's fine. I mean, when Ray told me, like, he wasn't in A Run for More, wasn't comfortable with the topic of music, or I said, well, let's kind of experiment and see what happens. And that's kind of like the job that we have to do, in a way, kind of guide. You're hired for this work, and you know you're not hand holding the director. It's kind of like an exploration. Like, let's see what happens.
Yeah, I love that. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
So we're going to slide into our next segment. But before we do, are there any words of advice or lessons you have learned, mistakes you have made that you want to share with us?
Plenty. Man, I remember things not to do. Don't go in, don't write music and then expect it to be perfect the first time. That rarely happens. It's like, I don't know, it's like seeing Bigfoot in the forest or something. It's I in the beginning I was, and also try not to be so attached to your music. It's, if you're going to be so attached to it, then you should write concert music, in terms of, because you don't have anyone to answer to except for yourself as a composer. But if you're working in a collaborative medium like film, right, especially documentary film, where you have, director takes years to do this, and then you come in and they give you time to do it, don't be so hard-headed, and just be open to the exploration and the feedback. It's not really criticism, it's more like feedback. It's like, or notes, right? So don't take it personally as a composer, because in the beginning I was like, I think I had those moments. I'm like, what? They're talking about my music? What do you mean? Like,
you gave me notes?
Exactly.
Really? That's what Jeff did to me. I'd given him a few notes, and he finally was like, I just don't think that I'm the composer for you.
Right.
And I was like, no, you are. We are going to figure this out.
Right. Yeah.
But he would say, I'm just a moody composer. You have to just, excuse me.
And I've learned to get rid of that part of, like, that visceral response early on. So that's one thing I would say. And then I would say also, a word of advice is just embrace technology, because I had to learn it the hard way. I didn't go to film scoring school, although I did later on. I think 2 or 3 years into living in LA, I did a film scoring workshop called the ASCAP Film Scoring Workshop, where 12 people get selected out of like hundreds of applicants.
Wow.
And
Whoa.
that was probably like the best finishing school for film scoring, because we got to use the same musicians, same music score service that like John Williams and Hans Zimmer uses like in LA. But prior to that, it was just me like going on YouTube and doing research. There was this thing called the Film Scoring Network from the 90s, which I looked up when I was like starting to do this. So the resources were there. I just didn't, I kind of like self-taught it. And I even would watch films and analyze the scores. I would just talk into a little recording device. Okay, here they're doing this, and why did it work? And
oh wow,
and, I had to get creative with like how to do this. So I would say if you have the wherewithal to kind of embrace, get the technology and embrace it, please do so, because and now with AI, things are changing quickly.
Oh yeah.
Who knows how that's going to affect filmmaking in the future, or even the composition process,
Yeah. All we know now is that it will affect it. It will change every artistic endeavor. It'll touch every corner. Some ways will be good and other ways will be painful,
right,
and possibly evil. Who knows? But it will definitely, it has made its impact.
Yeah. It's scary for sure. Or exciting.
Yeah. Well, it's both.
Yeah.
So you mentioned to us before we started that you had written an article recently for No Film School. Can you talk to us about that?
Yes. I think that the article was based on a Run for More, and how I met Ray, and the whole process of writing the score for the film. And it's basically something that, I mean, all filmmakers listening to this can read it. It's on the No Film School website. But it kind of goes into the process of, the spotting session, the temp music, just everything in post-production, the editing, all the rewrites and cue revisions I did for the film, and then getting into the nitty-gritty of like some of the sounds I created, some synth stuff, and the violin, viola recording manipulations I did. And then another thing I should bring up is also I had I think we were down to the wire for the timeline. It was going to be at a film festival, and I was busy doing cue conforming, which is basically adjusting the score to the new cut of the film. So I had to bring in help from musician friends that I have, who helped me with additional music. And I just want to give a shout out to Chris Harris, who helped me with that, and also Brandy Thomas. Because usually when composers are down to the wire, they bring in extra help in studio, and the bigger composers also do this as well, like in studio features, bigger productions, just to meet the deadline. Sometimes there's not enough time. So I talk about that in the article and all the aspects of that. So that's kind of like a quick summary.
Yeah, we'll link that down below. Last thing before we go into our DocuView Déjà Vu segment, what are you most proud of with A Run for More?
Oh, that's a good question. I would say being part of Frankie's journey in terms of telling her story, because this movie is not just about a transgender politician in like Texas. It kind of tells you the state of where we're at in terms of this issue. Um, and I'm just proud that I'm able to contribute whatever I can, in telling that story. You know, all the musical things I've done, that's in support of telling the story. So it's I'm just humbled by being able to be a part of these stories, just like I was with Sound of Identity as well, telling that story. But A Run for More is something. It kind of touches on the cusp of something that we're an issue that's very important to a lot of people, and I see it hopefully changing for the better in terms of telling these stories one by one. So
Wonderful.
I'm proud of that.
Good. Well, congratulations on that. We wish you all the best with that and the other things. But now it's time for DocuView Déjà Vu. All right, Jason, we're going to start with you.
Because I don't have one. And you knew that. You set me up.
I did. Because I'm going to give yours to Nicholas. So he gets a turn to tell us about 2 documentaries. I think the first one is A Sound of Identity, which you've mentioned a couple of times.
Yes.
Why don't you tell us the log line and show us where we can watch the movie?
Yes. So The Sound of Identity is a documentary I scored, I have to say, but it's also a very interesting watch. It's about Lucia Lucas, the first transgender opera singer to perform a major work, in this case, the opera Don Giovanni in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And you can watch it on Stars and also on VOD like Amazon. And I think, and if you just type The Sound of Identity on Google, you can find a lot of places to watch it. So.
Beautiful. All right. And what's your second one?
Oh, my second one is Rock Hudson, All That Heaven Allowed. I just watched it. I was interested in Rock Hudson because he's very handsome and a superstar, and I didn't know much about him. And I watched it, and I thought it was brilliant how he showcased his life from early on until the final days. And you can watch it on Max.
Awesome. All right. Thank you very much for that. All right, it's my turn, and I'm going to talk about a documentary that I just thought was phenomenal. And this is called Bombshell, the Hedy Lamarr story. It is on Netflix. It is a biological film. It's written and co-edited by Alexandra Dean. And it's it's about the life of the actress of Hedy Lamarr. And it is eye-opening on so many different levels because I had no idea. I mean, I knew she was a beautiful actress, but I had no idea about her brilliance. And I didn't even know that it would collide with my World War II interests, but she ended up creating an incredible invention during World War II to solve some major problems. And sadly, it was shelved. She wasn't given credit. And lots of things ensued. So it's a very beautiful and sad story, but very well done. And I recommend it to everyone. And that's it, except I guess now it's time for a company update. Yeah, so with documentary first, there has not been a lot going on since the last podcast, simply because we recorded that 3 hours ago. But what I will tell you I am going to do this week is I have just received the book that Hank Hanna wrote. If you're watching this, you'll be able to see this little book. Hank Hanna is who I talked about last week, a soldier that wrote contemporaneous diaries during the Battle of Carentan in Normandy, France in 1944. And one of the biggest things that I have to do is go through this book as well as that contemporaneous journal and type it out so that we can begin incorporating that into the score. That's a big thing on my to-do list. It's super difficult to read. So I think I need to find somebody to read it while I type, or vice versa, because it would take me a million years to do that. So That's
Now,
the
see,
thing I'm working on. Yeah.
that's what an AI should be able to do. You just like hold that up to a camera, it transcribes it all. And
Yes, that would be amazing. We have pictures. I have pictures of that little diary, but oh man, it's excruciating to read. How he could write in cursive handwriting in a tiny little notebook about intricate details of war is beyond me. But
Wow.
he did. So
That's great.
that's what I will be deciphering over the next week.
All right. So I guess that's it for this episode. Thank you so much, Nicholas, for coming by. We loved talking to you, hearing about your story, and we're excited to see what you work on next. And thanks to everyone for listening to Documentary First, where we believe everyone has a story to tell, and you can be the one to tell it.
Yes, you can. Bye, everybody.